Hello everyone, EtherSong here, and today I am back with another Blue Protocol video. In today's video, I'm going to be looking at some of the discussion inside the Japanese community after the latest developer live stream, the 6.3 stream. So let's look at some of the discussion going on. First up here, we have a survey that was conducted that was asking the players, or asking other community members what they thought was the strongest weapon during the network test. And at the very top here we have the bow, followed by the hammer, then the staff, then the swords, and then the axes. So it would be at the top Keen Strider, followed by Foebreaker, followed by Spellweaver, then the Blade Warden, and then finally Twin Striker. And this makes sense since a lot of the players in the test were talking about how powerful the Keen Strider was, and also there was some discussion about how the Foebreaker also had a lot of damage behind it. And going into this, we can see that this leads into the discussion about changes made to the classes, the feedback the developers got, and they said that they're going to be making changes to, I guess, was it increase the aggro the Blade Warden can take, and also increase the damage and cooldowns, increase damage and lower cooldowns for things like the Twin Striker and Spellweaver. And it seems like a lot of people were happy that the Spellweaver and Twin Striker were going to be getting better. So somebody said like the axe and the staff are going to be fixed. So they're happy. And they're saying, I guess there was some problems with the aggro system and things like that. So a lot of people were pretty excited for the changes. A lot of people saying that the axe was really, really weak here, wasn't it? And finally, the age of the axe and staff is going to be coming. So overall, it looks positive for the changes, although some people were worried about how these changes will affect matchmaking and things. If they start putting more value into class roles, for example, the Blade Warden is going to be more centralized around, holding the aggro, so acting as a tank role. But if that becomes a necessity, along with the Keen Strider, healing players, are you going to need a Blade Warden and a Keen Strider in your party? If those are necessary for parties in the later game or certain dungeons, how will that affect the auto matchmaking? So there's some discussion around that, and it's something we'll have to wait and see. How necessary will these classes be for parties in certain content? Are you going to need to have your party put together in a certain way, have a certain, like, one tank, 2 healers, 2 damage dealers, or something like that? We don't really know how it's going to work, but it's something to keep an eye on. But something to keep in mind is even if certain party compositions will be optimal for content, there is a matchmaking, what is it, not matchmaking, but like a looking for group feature in the game aside from the standard auto matchmaking. So if you want to put together a certain party composition, you can put out a look for a group request or whatever, saying you're looking for certain party members, or look for other things that people have posted about groups. So that's always something to keep in mind. We'll have to see how these changes affect how the role balance will be. So will you need certain roles to do certain content? That's something to keep in mind for future in the game. Another thing that the Japanese community was talking about was the change to the Twin Striker's last waltz ability. So before, as if you were below, I believe it was 30%, you got a damage boost. And that was one of the shared class abilities. So this is an ability that you could lock on the Twin Striker, a passive ability, but it also could be shared with other classes. And they changed this, they announced they changed this in the recent developer stream, right? And it's being changed to increase damage while you're above 70%. Now, what the discussion here being brought up about is, will this be necessary on all classes then? If it's an ability that increases damage while you're above 70%, that's not going to be very difficult to do, right? Not going to be very difficult to have your life high, right? And in those cases, if it's a shared ability that's increasing this damage, are all classes going to want this ability on them? Because damage increase abilities are always super important in games like this, so you want to be able to increase your damage. And will this become a necessity? Well, all classes need to have this other class ability unlocked. I don't know if it's going to be the point where if you don't have it, you're not going to be able to do content, but for the optimal setup, this perhaps could become needed. So that's something to keep in mind. How will these other class abilities affect things? Will certain class abilities become like a must for doing something if you want to have the optimal build? So this is a discussion, something to keep in mind. I'm not really sure how much like certain builds will be, like optimal builds will be better than their other counterparts. Will it be to the point if you don't have that build, will people saying, oh, you can't come in our group? I don't know if it'll get that far, but it's going to be something that the balance around these shared class abilities will have to be kept in mind. Because if a certain class ability is going to be used on all the classes because it's just better than everything else, that could become a problem. So that's something that maybe the developers need to keep in mind for the future. Moving on, there was some players saying that they kind of liked the way that they're going to have healing increase while you sit down. And I guess a lot of players were saying that's, do we really need that? Or that feels like kind of like an old feature. And that is true. It feels like a lot of like older online games kind of had this feature of sitting down to heal. And for Blue Protocol going forward, it's not the only way to heal, right? You're going to have natural healing or regeneration in the fields, but it will speed up your healing. And then you also have the campsites or villages to further increase healing. But I think it's kind of adds to the atmosphere of the game, being able to sit down. So I don't really mind it. So after you like fight something, you can sit down. Is it needed? I don't know if it's needed, but perhaps it can add to like a, just like the feeling of the game, or to kind of like a role-playing aspect to it. So I can see how some players could hate it or not really like it. Like, why do we need this? But I can see how other players kind of enjoy it as a kind of like a role-playing aspect to it. Moving on. Next topic was the next live stream, right? So at this point, people inside the Japanese community are getting kind of anxious, right? They want the game to release. And even in regards to the last developer live stream, 6.3, right? Looking at the YouTube chat and whatnot, you could see a lot of, I guess, negative comments and things like that where players are saying we don't really need any more changes, we just want the game to come out. Hurry up and release the game. And I think that's a feeling that a lot of players in Japan have. They just want the game to come out. They've been waiting for so long and waiting, and then developers are saying, well, we're going to make some more changes. Now, I guess if we think about this, why are the developers making some of these changes? So after network tests, we see that they had the developer live stream. They said they're making a number of changes, and these all do feel like changes that are going to improve the game. Now, why are these changes going into the game before its release? Most likely, the developers came to the conclusion that without these changes, it would negatively affect the game's release. So it would affect the experience for new players coming in the game. Because, if players come into the game as new players, right? And they have a negative experience early on, they might just quit the game, and then they'll be losing users. So before that happens, I guess they wanted to iron out some of the rougher areas or problem areas for the new player experience and early class balance and things like that. So when players come into the game, they have a better experience, they're more likely to stay, they're more likely to spend money, right? So I think that is the reason why they're making some of these changes right now. But I can understand players asking for the game to come out, right? And because of that, a lot of players are thinking that this next number 7 live stream will most likely be about the game's release or release date, right? With many players saying if there's anything else, if they don't have the release date in this stream, I won't believe it. People are at the point where they're thinking that this will definitely be the stream, and I'm personally believing that's also, I'm also personally believing the same thing, right? That this next stream will most likely have a release date. It would be hard to believe that they're not going to have a release date in the next stream at this point. As for the release date itself, some people are predicting maybe June or July. So it looks like some common things. But also other people are worried about, the developers kind of hinted, if there are problems, we might have another decimal stream. So you can like say 6.3 stream. If there's a 6.4 stream, that means there's some trouble happening. And nobody wants to see a 6.4 stream. If at a 6.4 stream happens at this point, you'll most likely see the developers in quite a glum mood. They'll most likely look like they came from a funeral or something. Which happened when they had to announce, was it the 6.1 stream, I believe? Announced the big bug that happened. They're saying, we're sorry, but we have to delay the network test by 2 months. And they weren't looking very happy in that stream. But hopefully there will be no 6.4 stream. And we'll just go straight to the number 7 stream at the end of this month. And when that stream will be, we'll most likely have to wait for an announcement. Maybe in the next couple of weeks. I mean, looking at the calendar, they like to have a lot of these streams, feels like on Tuesdays. So maybe the 23rd or 30th? If they say end of the month, maybe maybe the 30th will be it. But if it's a little bit early, perhaps the 23rd. If it's earlier and later, I'll be happy because maybe that'll mean that the release date's closer. We'll have to see, though. As for some other things, there was also discussion about Phantasy Star Online 2 New Genesis releasing a toon shader. And some players were wondering how this will affect Blue Protocol. Because there's going to be a update coming to New Genesis. I'm not sure, is it out yet or is it coming still? But there's going to be this update that releases a toon shader in the game where you can adjust, and it also has like the ability to adjust it, right? So you can make adjustments to the outline and things like that. So players looking for this kind of anime-like game, perhaps the New Genesis toon shader will appeal to them, and perhaps that could affect Blue Protocol. I don't really know how much it will really affect things. New Genesis has been out for a while, and when it released, they didn't really have much content. But perhaps it's slowly building up a player base again, because I think a lot of players just left after they realized there was no more content. But with these updates, maybe more players will start coming back to New Genesis, or other players will try it out. I think they're also releasing like a housing kind of update, which is also something that a lot of players from Blue Protocol, or I guess a lot of the Blue Protocol community, is kind of hoping for as well, as having some kind of housing feature, which is something I would really like to see in Blue Protocol as well. If you have a game focused around, like characters' appearance and, like trying on various outfits and things like that, it's not just the combat, but it's the social aspect of the game that's really important, right? So in regards to that, having, maybe like a team housing or like a guild housing kind of thing where you can go there to meet up with other players, maybe take pictures and things like that. I think that's also important to the game. So hopefully the developers are looking at things like that. They kind of talked about that lifestyle content. They had the fishing. Maybe they'll have other things related to that. So I don't know, cooking, but maybe it'll also have a housing kind of feature that they're looking at as well. So hopefully something like that comes to the game. Here we have a survey that I believe a member of the Japanese community asked people from overseas, asking, or maybe it was just they found a survey, but it was a survey towards overseas players asking how many of them are thinking about playing on the Japanese server once it releases. And you had 348 saying that they would, and around 1,200 saying no, and then was it around 400 that weren't sure? So there was a decent number of players that are thinking about playing. And as for why they would be playing, perhaps they just want to test out the game early, see what it's like, since if there's going to be a delay between the Japanese release and the Amazon release, perhaps a lot of players will just want to try to test out the game in classes like that early, get a feel for the game, and then move back to the Amazon servers once it releases there. And also perhaps just some players are worried about how Amazon's going to release the game, so they just want to play on the Japanese version like that. In regards to that, there was one comment here saying that since it's a Japanese player, it's mostly going to be a Japanese server, there's mostly going to be Japanese players, so if people are using English, they might be reported as a bot or something like that. So I don't know how open the Japanese community is to people from overseas joining their server. I know in, what was it, like Final Fantasy 14, there are some certain servers that have a lot of players from overseas, so you see English quite a bit. But the question really comes down to, is Blue Protocol going to be open to players from overseas with the Japanese release? For the test so far, we had the IP restrictions, right? Where you had to use a VPN to be able to get into the Japanese version of the game. And I think that also relates to the Japanese Bandai Namco account. But how strict will they be with that with the game's release? With the tests, I can kind of understand, right? For a network test, you want to be able to test the network conditions for players in that region, right? So inside of Japan. So being strict on players outside of Japan trying to enter the test makes sense. But once the game releases, are they going to be as strict? I'm not really sure, but we'll have to see how that turns out. Moving on here, there's another discussion about one of the game systems where you deal 0 damage to things that are a certain number of levels higher than you. And some people are wondering, do we really need this system in the game? And you can encounter this at certain points. For example, I was still leveling up and I was in one zone, and then one of the field bosses, you know, the unique monsters, appeared. And I wanted to attack that to be able to get one of the monster ideas for crafting, that Battle Imagine. But at that point, I wasn't high enough level to be able to do any damage to it. So even though there's a lot of players around me attacking the monster, and I'm doing questing in the area, I wasn't able to get any damage in, so I wasn't able to get the idea. And that kind of feels bad for areas like that. If you see like something nearby you and everyone's like fighting, it's like, oh, I want to join in. And you can't join in because you can't deal any damage. It's like, well, what should I do? Should I just ignore all the players around me fighting this thing? I feel like other games maybe handle that a little bit better, that allow, you know, even if you're lower level, you can do a little bit of damage. I don't know if this has to do with the looting system and experience system in Blue Protocol, maybe they don't want players that are too low level just kind of leeching off higher players, or being able to go to a higher level zone and have a higher level player kill things for them to get experience. But perhaps they could be a little bit more lenient on the restrictions for level. But another place where this was negatively affecting things was in dungeons. And I saw some other players talking about this in discussions, but for the ID here is this instance dungeons, there was a problem where if you had the battle score to go into these dungeons, for example, I made a full break. I switched to a full breaker as another class to try it out. And I had the materials to craft things early, so I got the battle score up pretty high early on. I think I was only like level 6 or something, but there was a level, it's like 10 or 12 or something dungeon, like the first dungeon you go to, maybe it's level 10 or something like that. It was the second dungeon, the Dragonclaw Valley dungeon anyways. It's the one where you get the level 10 weapon. But I went into that with the battle score required to get inside of it. But since I was still lower level, I wasn't doing much damage to some of the enemies, and especially the final boss at the end, I barely was doing any damage at all. So even though I met the requirements to get in, it was like I was a weight to my party. I was pulling them down because there wasn't really much I could do. Attacking things, I would barely do any damage. So if they're going to limit how much damage you can deal because of level, they need to maybe put that limit on the dungeons as well. They have the battle score limit, but that didn't really mean much. Even having the required battle score, I still wasn't able to assist my party in that dungeon. So they may need to either lower the penalty you get for that damage difference, and perhaps also put a level restriction on those instant dungeons so things like that don't happen, where you have players that are meeting the battle score required to get in these dungeons, but can do next to no damage to certain enemies inside of those. It's like, well, I met the requirements to get in, but I can't do any damage. And that seems like a problem with kind of the game system or the game requirements that are being set to go into these dungeons. Because if they're letting players in that do like 0 damage because of this like level difference system, that's a problem that needs to be looked at. Next up, there was also talk about perhaps Blue Protocol will look at doing collabs with things in the future. So we had, like the new game that was at Star Rail was doing some collabs with VTubers. Will Blue Protocol look at doing collabs with VTubers and things once it releases? It's kind of hard to tell, but I wonder if they're going to do more marketing at some point. Because right now their marketing is pretty next to none. I feel like, I guess Amazon is doing a lot of marketing for their version of the game, or at least some marketing with at the Game Awards, they had an announcement and things like that, which brought some interest to the game. But for Blue Protocol itself, I haven't seen much talk about it or much like marketing done for it. And that's probably because the release date isn't really set. They did have that opening anime movie with a song created for it. But perhaps after the next live stream, if there's a release date announced, then they'll go into full marketing mode. Just try to get players to come to the game when it releases. And that makes me wonder, how much time are they going to want for marketing the game before the release? So after the release date is announced, how much time are they going to want until the game's released for marketing? And what kinds of marketing are they going to do? Are they going to do some collabs with some VTubers and things like that? I guess even inside the game, it makes me wonder, this is not exactly just about collabs with VTubers, but are they going to do some maybe collabs with like anime and things like that to have unique outfits in the game and things like that? Similar to Phantasy Star Online. They kind of do a lot of collabs with various, I guess, IPs and things. So that'll be something to kind of look forward to, how the marketing and things, collabs with different IPs and things are going to be done with Blue Protocol. As for some other things, I found something like kind of interesting on the play guide that I had missed before, but this is the play guide for Blue Protocol on their main website in Japan, the official website in Japan. But they kind of had this information about the delivery quests, which are a special type of quests that you can do for a limited amount of time. So there's these things called bonus quests, and these are time-limited quests where you can get certain rewards. But there was also, what do we have here? Daily quests. So we got to look at what daily quests will look like. Looks like there's 3 different quests, and you might be able to switch them out. Yeah, it looks like you can switch them out a certain number of times. And there's also tickets that look like you can complete them perhaps instantly. The objectives themselves don't look super difficult. One of them's open up a treasure chest, clear a mission. Another one's log in, so that's pretty easy. So those were some things. And then there's the weekly quests. Looking at these, also looking at the daily quest one more time as well, but you can see on the right side, there's these season rewards. And these give you points for your season rewards. So it says your season rank 1, and your time to number of points needed to rank up is 100. And the number of points you have currently. So these would give 10 each. And this was kind of talked about before, but through ranking up your season rank, at a certain point, then you're able to buy certain season rewards with points, with your season points. So I believe how it works is you use your points to rank up to a certain rank level, and once you reach that level, you're able to buy certain rewards for that season. I don't know what the rewards will be exactly. Maybe there'll be certain outfits or consumables and things like that, but you're able to use your season points to buy those seasonal rewards. And we can see the same thing here with the weekly quests. They're giving season reward points as well. And these are the weekly quests. You have defeat a named enemy, use consumable items 7, gather, 75 times. I guess gathering's not super difficult. If you're looking for mushrooms, that'll be completed in no time. Craft things at the crafting station. So these are some examples of the weekly quests. And then finally you have season quests. And these are quests that are available to do during that season. And the seasons, I believe the range was from around 50 to 60 days, they were saying, was for a season. So that's like the same thing with the battle pass period. You have that much time for each season, and then most likely the season pass or the battle pass basically feature of the game will also change after that. So you have around 50 to 60 days to complete these. And some of the objectives include things like defeat enemies 100. Shouldn't be too difficult. Log in 30 times. So that would involve logging in maybe half of the days during the season. These look like ways to incentivize players to keep logging in. Use items. Using items shouldn't be too difficult, I would think. Oh, but there's multiple levels to this. So use items 10 times, 20 times, 30 times. So it looks like there'll probably be a little bit of variety to different things to do during that season that you can kind of look to complete to get points for your season points. All right. And that's everything I had to kind of talk about today. Next thing to look forward to is when will the next live stream be, right? And hopefully it'll be the number 7 live stream, not a 6.4. If it's 6.4, we're in trouble. But I'm feeling optimistic. I feel like they can do it. We'll look forward to number 7 live stream sometime at the end of this month. And hopefully we'll get the release date then, right? Anyways, let me know what you think about the Japanese player community feedback and things like the daily quests, weekly quests. And I hope to see you next time. Thanks for tuning in. Later.